Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind can convince you of something? You'll never change, you're too old. What in the world were you thinking? We've all experienced this. Yet most of us never stop to ask one simple question. Should I automatically trust what my brain is telling me? Our thoughts no doubt influence us, but are we allowing them to define who we are? Today we address a very important issue. Your brain is not your boss. In this podcast, you'll discover why our brains can be so convincing, why we often mistake our thoughts for facts, and how one simple shift can help us stop automatically reacting to every thought that enters our minds. This is a Karen Schaal podcast where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Schaal. Let's get started. Over the past several episodes, we have spent a lot of time talking about change. Much of that conversation has focused on changing our behavior. Today, we are moving a little deeper because lasting change is not only about changing what we do, it is also about changing the relationship we have with our own thoughts. Most of us have probably never given that relationship much consideration. A thought enters our mind, and simply because we thought it, we assume it must be true, important, or deserving of our attention. All too often, we feel an urgent need to act on it. But a thought is not automatically a fact or a command, and it definitely is not automatically an accurate reflection of who we are. Our thoughts influence our emotions, our decisions, and the way we see ourselves, other people, and the world around us. But our thoughts do not have to define us. Now, I want to be fair to our brains here. Our brains and our thoughts are not the enemy. The human brain is one of the most remarkable gifts we have been given. It allows us to reason, imagine, create, and learn and solve problems. It helps us recognize beauty, appreciate the people we love, and discover new possibilities. My brain has given me some wonderful thoughts over the years. It has reminded me to encourage someone, help me work through problems, and sparked ideas I may have never have discovered otherwise. Sometimes our thoughts are deeply supportive. Those thoughts can strengthen us, guide us, and remind us of what we already know. But our brain has many responsibilities, and not every thought it produces is serving the same purpose. One of its most important responsibilities is protection. Our brain is constantly on watch, comparing, predicting, and looking for anything that might become a problem. Sometimes that protective instinct is incredibly valuable. It alerts us to real danger and reminds us to slow down and pay attention. But sometimes protection becomes overprotection. Our brain warns us about things that have not happened, predicts outcomes it cannot possibly know, and it takes an old insecurity, adds a little fear, and presents the whole thing as if it were the absolute truth. This doesn't mean our brain is broken. It means our brain is trying to do its job. The question is whether these thoughts are grounded in reality. We all have cracks in our confidence, old insecurities, and areas where we are still growing. Our brain can quickly identify those vulnerable places and may still hold an outdated view of who we are and what we can handle. This does not mean we have to accept that view. Think about the helicopter parent. We recognize that behavior easily when we see it in someone else. The parent is not trying to harm the child, quite the opposite. The parent is trying to protect the child. But when protection becomes excessive, it can keep the child from developing confidence, independence, and resilience. The child misses opportunities. Sometimes our brain behaves in much the same way. It urges us to stay close to what is familiar and encourages us to avoid the very experiences that could help us grow. If we obey that helicopter voice every time it speaks, we may remain safe and comfortable, but we can also remain stuck. Developing a healthier relationship with our thoughts doesn't mean fighting our brain or criticizing it for trying to protect us. We need to recognize what is happening, understand why our brain is responding that way, and continue moving forward. I remember getting ready to give one of my first presentations. I knew my material, had practiced my talk, and had done everything I needed to be ready. The night before the presentation, I decided to go through everything one last time. And suddenly, it all fell apart. I stumbled over sentences, lost my train of thought, and could barely get through a few lines without forgetting something or mixing up my words. Then my brain really got going. You can't do this. Who do you think you are? Why did you say yes to this? The thoughts came rushing in, and the harder I tried to concentrate, the worse it became. I wasn't yet a seasoned speaker, so my brain had plenty of uncertainty to work with. It found every crack in my confidence and filled it with fear. Finally, I said, that's it, I'm going to bed. Continuing to practice was only making things worse. I wish I could say I dismissed everything my brain was telling me then, but I didn't. I started wondering whether I was really prepared, whether I should cancel, or whether I should somehow call in sick. For a while, I began to believe those messages. But the next morning, I got up, gave the presentation, and it went wonderfully. Nothing my brain had predicted the night before actually happened. Today, I would recognize what was happening much sooner. I would stop practicing, give my mind a rest, and allow some clarity to return. I would understand that my brain was trying to protect me rather than accurately predicting what was going to happen. Looking back, that experience taught me something I did not fully understand at the time. Just because a thought enters my mind does not mean it deserves a seat at my table. Some thoughts deserve my attention, and some are simply an overprotected brain making a great deal of noise. The goal is not to silence our thoughts here. The goal is to stop automatically assuming that every thought is true, important, or worthy of guiding our decisions. Our brain can offer its opinion, but it is not the boss. If you have ever experienced something like this, and I'm sure most of you have, you're not broken, you're certainly not alone. What we are dealing with is not a brain that calmly presents us with a complete and perfectly balanced report. Our brain works quickly, it sorts through information and makes judgments, often before we have had time to consider what is actually happening. Psychologists have identified several patterns that help explain why our thoughts can feel so convincing, even when they are not telling us the whole truth. The first is called negativity bias. Our brain can give negative information more weight than equally important positive information. In a well-known study, psychologist Tiffany Ito and her colleagues measured participants' brain activity as they viewed positive, negative, and neutral images. The negative images produced a stronger evaluative response than positive images of comparable intensity. In other words here, the brain responded more strongly to what was wrong than to what was right. That doesn't mean our brain is incapable of encouraging our positive thoughts. We've already established that it gives us many helpful thoughts. But when something appears threatening, embarrassing, uncertain, or potentially painful, that information may arrive carrying more weight. One critical comment can seem more important than many compliments. One mistake can suddenly appear to erase years of successful experience, and one moment of nervousness can become evidence that we are not capable. The negative thought does not always win because it is more accurate. Sometimes it wins simply because the brain gives it a louder voice. Then another pattern can begin. Once our brain forms an opinion, it may start looking for evidence that supports it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. In a classic study, Peter Watson asked participants to discover a rule governing a sequence of numbers. Instead of deliberately testing examples that might disprove their initial idea, many participants kept choosing examples that confirmed what they already believed. Only 6 of the 29 participants reached the correct answer without first announcing an incorrect one. This matters because our brain can do the same thing with the opinions it holds about us. Once it says you're not ready, it starts collecting evidence. You forget one sentence, evidence. You feel nervous, more evidence. Someone in the audience looks distracted. There it is again. Meanwhile, your preparation, experience, successful rehearsals, and the people who believed you were ready may receive very little attention. The brain reaches a conclusion and then starts building a case to support it. Impostor phenomenon, impostor syndrome commonly called, is another powerful example. This is the thought that says you're going to be found out. people will discover that you are not as capable as you think you are. In a 2022 experiment involving 170 people, researchers gave participants what they were told was an intelligence test, and then assigned them positive or negative feedback. People with stronger imposter tendencies were more likely to attribute success to outside causes, while treating failure as evidence about their own ability. In very plain language, success was explained away, but failure was taken personally. Think about how difficult it is to update our view of ourselves when the brain plays by those rules. If we succeed, it was luck. If someone compliments us, they're simply being kind. If we receive an opportunity, someone must have overestimated us. But if we struggle or make a mistake, suddenly the brain says, there, that's the real you. That's not a balanced review of the evidence. When we put these patterns together, we begin to understand why the brain can be so persuasive. It may give negative information more weight, look for evidence supporting its first conclusion, and discount evidence that contradicts an old view of who we are. These are not malicious tricks, they are mental shortcuts and protected patterns. But automatic does not always mean accurate, and urgent does not always mean necessary. Perhaps this is one reason moderation and self-regulation have been considered so important to character development throughout history. Long before people understood brain activity or cognitive bias, they recognized that not every thought, emotion, or impulse should be allowed to direct our behavior. The language may have changed, but the lesson remains. Our brain is remarkable. It can encourage us, protect us, solve problems, and generate extraordinary ideas. But it can also exaggerate, defend an outdated view, and present an opinion as though it were a fact. Our brain can contribute valuable information, but it does not have the final authority. Your brain is not your boss. So how do we begin changing the way we respond when our brain speaks with such certainty? We do not need to analyze every thought that enters our mind. That would become exhausting very quickly. We simply need to become more aware of the moments when our brain sounds certain but may not have all the facts. The first step is recognition. Once we understand these patterns, we can begin to recognize them as they happen. Maybe our brain has taken one small mistake and turned it into the whole story, or decided what someone thinks of us without any real evidence. Sometimes it is simply repeating an old opinion of who we are rather than reflecting who we are today. The purpose is not to argue with every thought. It is simply to recognize that a thought has been produced by a brain that may be working quickly, protectively, and with incomplete information. Then we look at the full picture. What evidence do I actually have? Am I giving one negative detail more importance than everything else? Am I overlooking something important? And what else is true? That final question is especially important because it helps us move beyond the first story our brain has created and see the situation more completely. Gratitude helps us widen the frame as well. It doesn't deny what is difficult or pretend that something negative didn't happen, but it helps us notice what else is true. So one mistake, criticism, or fear doesn't become the entire story. This is not positive thinking, it is more accurate thinking. We are not replacing one incomplete story with another. We are refusing to let one thought, one fear, or one interpretation speak for the whole of reality. Once we have considered the fuller picture, we can make an informed decision. Sometimes our brain is alerting us to something important. We may need to prepare more carefully, slow down, reconsider a decision, or ask for help. But sometimes the thought is simply the brain's old protective system making a great deal of noise. Our responsibility here is to know the difference as well as we can. That is where self-regulation becomes important. Self-regulation doesn't mean suppressing what we think or feel. It means that our thoughts and emotions are part of the decision, but they are not automatically in charge of the decision. We recognize what is happening, we understand why our brain may be responding in a certain way, we consider the facts, and then we choose how to move forward. So I ask you this week, go ahead and pay attention to one thought that arrives with unusual certainty or urgency. Don't immediately accept it or fight it. Simply look at it more closely. Ask yourself whether your brain is presenting the full story. Then ask what else is true. That one question can begin to loosen the grip of an old insecurity, an incomplete story, or a fear that has been speaking with far more authority than it deserves. Your brain can offer its opinion. You can listen and consider it, and then you can make the decision. The human brain is extraordinary, but it does not always give us the full story. A thought is not automatically a fact, a command, or an accurate reflection of who we are. We can consider what is true, look at the fuller picture, and choose how we want to move forward. Our thoughts influence us, but they do not have to define us. And just because a thought enters our mind does not mean it deserves, again, a seat at our table. I appreciate you joining me today. If this episode encouraged you, please like and subscribe, and do share it with those you care for. Sometimes a little exposure to a new idea can lead to greater understanding. Until next time, remember, your brain is incredibly powerful, but it is not your boss. This is a Karen Schaal podcast where we expand the mind and grow the heart. I'm Karen Schaal. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.